unless it's to find a good guess. And we started then with aspiration that we might bring perspective and depth to our understanding about how learning is affected by the places in which we learn, and how the places in which we learn can be informed by desired outcomes of learning. And we create that conversation between the two. So the activity of learning and the place in which it happens. The other thing we understood quite clearly was that there are formal definitions of both, but there are informal experiences of both as well, and that neither takes complete precedence over the other, and that as we investigated the opportunities, we inform the formal with the informal, and vice versa, and we inform the activity of learning with the place of learning, vice versa. It's been an interesting experience over those many years. It's taken us to unexpected places. Most recently and most unexpectedly, Ben's been standing in corridors, which is sometimes a safe thing to do.
And Claire's been drawing activities in corridors.
It's been a tag team, hasn't it?
Right. And that, of course, is the hospital research. And we found ourselves going from experiences in schools through to hospitals. The good thing about this network is that it is open to the unexpected, and we are learning by being led to where we need to be, rather than defining specifically what we believe is the issue, and then trying to impose that in a particular context. In other words, it's a highly responsive research process. The other important part of Learn has been that it has responded to the participants directly. That's been helpful, I think, because we understand that while we've been designing classrooms or learning places for centuries, in fact, the foundings of the old universities in Europe, Bologna in the 8th century, in Europe, in England it would be the Oxford model in the 14th century. Those were learning places, but they made assumptions about what learning was, and that, of course, the assumption there was that it was ecclesiastical. In other words, there was the right knowledge, which was ordained and given to us, and we were there to pick up that preordained knowledge. So we've been building learning environments for centuries. What we've come to understand, though, is that there's much more richness to this discussion. More richness, perhaps, than we even understand today. And that's where Learn as an activity has been so rewarding, is that we have been led and guided by participants, which has taken us to doing research in corridors. We've never anticipated that at the beginning. So why do we need to think about learning environments? I think the key thing which drives all of us in this field, of course, is a fundamental acknowledgement that the paradigm of learning is changing dramatically. The paradigm of learning has been through revision through the 20th century, and there's very interesting, substantial work done through the 20th century, in particular the middle of the 20th century, which led us to reconsider a very standard didactic model. But today, with all of the new technologies, the way knowledge is generated, the way knowledge is disseminated, and the accessibility of forms of knowledge, including incorrect knowledge, readily accessible. I'm thinking of Wikipedia in particular, where you can see all sorts of things which you're not quite sure is absolutely true. But we now understand that learning takes place in a far more diverse potential than we've understood in the past. And also, of course, in our own experience and our understanding that learning is not something which is not a phase that one passes through, which was, of course, how it was understood, especially back in the 14th century. So learning environments research is fundamental because we've got to enhance the outcomes of the learning experience. Increasingly, we invest vast sums in capital. And there was a phase in which capital was less considered. I can remember in my own work prior to being an academic when I was a consultant in industry, we were looking at corporations and their investments in facilities, and such capital was not accounted for. wasn't accounted for. It was expended, but never recorded thereafter, except for tax purpose. It became apparent that you had to understand what the productivity on an investment was. In other words, if you're building a laboratory, why do you do it? Where's the gain from doing it? And that mindset has to push all of us. We here in this university, of course, are struggling at the moment, as all universities in Australia, with the implications of a federal budget which threaten us even further. But that is a budget model which has never given us capital money for the last 15 years. We haven't had that experience. Some. So we do have to think about what's the return on an investment. Do we invest in an IT system that supports learning, or do we invest in a room that supports learning? That's a very clear stuff. So learning environments research must be conducted from that point of view. What's the best way to pursue learning and support learning? Should we be supporting it in ways that we don't anticipate, or should we be just running down the old model and building classrooms? One of the things I'm particularly proud of on this campus is that we have pursued creating opportunities for learning in environments that we would normally have not acknowledged. In other words, we think about the spaces between buildings. We think about spaces which are used for other purposes. So our multitude of coffee shops are now acknowledged to be places of learning. We need to understand what we do in support of the coffee shop, which we would never have done before as a university. What do we do in the spaces between the buildings? If you walk around the campus, you'll see that we have spent a fair amount of effort in creating places that students can intersect. We've also acknowledged that if learning comes from intersections of bodies of knowledge, which are unintended, so that we create bodies of new knowledge in these intersections. And this Learn is a wonderful example of that, where the School of Education, Graduate School of Education, the Melbourne School of Design, and the Faculty of Medical Dental Health Services, Ministry of Health Services, MDHS. When those three faculties intersect, we create new knowledge. So in thinking about that, we come to realize, of course, that formal classrooms may not be the case. So learning environments have to be researched because there are new understandings of what we're engaged in. The Learn as a network is rather successful because it has a great informality to it. It wanders off in directions which are unanticipated, and yet it still produces. We keep to the rigor and the discipline of production without predicting where that production is.
That's just making.
This is all of it, right?
Oh, it's
Rumble of the deep oceans, right? So what constitutes the good learning environments research? The main thing, I think, is that it brings together unexpected bodies of knowledge and disparate bodies of knowledge. It's not charted territory. It's a territory we are mapping collectively as we do it. What constitutes good research is that it brings in evidence and analyzes evidence as outcomes, but it also looks at the non-objective but the subjective experience of learning as well. And I think that any good environmental research will have to bring those qualitative aspects there as much as the quantitative aspects. That the pleasure of learning is something as much as our ability to measure a specific outcome of learning. So we engender a desire and a passion for learning through the experience of having the learning session. And you don't do that by having people sitting in a classroom. You do that in other contexts. The idea that learning environments research will help us understand how to support the development of a passion for lifelong learning is as important to me as do the children in a particular age cohort achieve the desired outcomes, and can they be measured on a metric so they can progress. We can do that. Latter one, quite readily, is the form that I worry about much more. Because the challenges are great. Young people today have regularly in their ears very significant people who are telling them, drop your education, go and do it. I'm sure you've seen those interviews online. or in the press. Richard Branson's a famous one. He became rich and famous not by having education, but for going out and doing it. And there are many role models today, I think, who are undermining the learning experience. And we've got to understand where that learning experience sits, not by insisting that the old model is right, but I think by demonstrating the value of new experiences. And I think learning environments research leads us in that direction as well. It's a fascinating field, and people in the room here are at the forefront of this, and I'm so excited by what Learn does and the group pulled together here. You've heard plenty of reports from doctoral research that's underway across the country. And when I read down that list, I was very, very sorry that I couldn't be here through the day. There's so many subjects that you touched upon so far today, which I think are fundamental. But a great pleasure I think we have at the University of Melbourne is that we've been part of this process, and we're enormously proud of that, and enormously grateful for the time everyone brings to it. But I hope I said something that painted a picture a little bit of why we're engaged in this. It's enormously important to us. It's our daily life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. We'll move now into the last two papers for the day. Next up, we've got Pam Farrelly. Thank you, Pam. Talking about a topic very close to my heart as an ex-science teacher myself. Pam is a science and maths educator over the course of a number of years in a number of schools around Melbourne. And she's currently undertaking her PhD, and her paper today is entitled Experience of the Secondary Science Learning Environment from the Student Perspective. Thank you, Pam.
Okay, thank you. Today I'm going to provide a review of my research, and excuse me for reading, but we'll try and keep on track. And I'm looking at student perceptions of their science learning environment in the middle years of their education, particularly at years 7 and 8. And at the moment, I'm still a Year 8 science teacher and maths teacher, so it's particularly close to home. When all these students come into the secondary school environment, they walk in on that first day and they're looking around the classroom, and there is that sensation of excitement. What am I going to do? Oh, look at this room, it's so much fun. Then there's the others, and it's not too sure about this. And you see them especially when you hand the box of matches over and say, you've got a live match today. And they go, oh, I'm not allowed to. But there's the enjoyment, and there's all these thrills and excitement and everything else. And then all of a sudden, it's science again. It's boring. What's the point? I really don't want to do it. And then by the time you get to year 11 and 12, those 8, 9, 10 classes of science students you had at year 7 have gone down to 24 students doing physics. We might have 24 doing chemistry. We might have 2 classes doing biology and a whole stack doing psychology. So what's going on in between year 7 and year 11? There's got to be something. So when I thought about all of these things, when I started to think about what was going on in the school, I thought I'll have a look at what's going on in the literature as well. And there's a whole lot about the learning environment, because to me it had to be more than just curriculum. I should have said that. It had to be more than just curriculum. Curriculum has been tweaked over time. But maybe there was something in the room itself. There's a whole lot of information about preschool and primary school. There's some more information coming out now about developments at the in the tertiary sector, and I've seen quite a few of those. There's some information about general teaching spaces in the secondary area. There's lots of information about classroom climate. Barry Fraser's done a whole heap of work about that. But classroom climate, he calls it environment sometimes, but it's not about the room itself. A lot of it is about relationships. Science classrooms, I found Dan Buten's article there. I found one specifically for me. And most of what I have found about these environments has come from teacher perspectives, but not the perspective of the students, unless it's been done in quantitative form. And that was a concern, so I needed to find out more. So my research questions, I'm just looking at the relationship between the people, places and artefacts associated with science education. I'm considering affordances provided to students by material and social aspects within the science learning environment, and how students are positioned by the people, the places and the artefacts in the science learning environment. I'll just whiz through some of this. The research I've undertaken is happening at the school where I'm teaching. And when I started my research, I was teaching at a campus not involved in the study, but there were two junior campuses. The first campus, built in the 1980s, was built with separate buildings, one for technology, one for English and humanities, one for science. Separate science block is over in the distance. It's been redeveloped in line with middle years philosophies, and it's got a very multicultural background in the population. Second campus was finished in 2004, and it was constructed with a middle years philosophy. There are 14 buildings, and each team building has its own science classroom. So very distinctly different in design. Again, very multicultural. We've got close to 50 different languages being spoken at the school. So very different groups of people involved at the college. So I don't know if that's significant quite yet, but we're working on that. During my research, I wanted to capture the students' voice. I wanted to hear what they had to say, and to do that, I was using them as co-researchers. It's an ethnographic study that I'm doing, and I was using them as my co-ethnographers. I was collecting student dialogue using personal meaning mapping. The students were collecting photographs for me, and we were involved in conversations, not interviews, not formal interviews, but conversations. And when I collected the data, it was being analysed using Engstrom's cultural historical activity theory and Haro's positioning theory, which Cheryl mentioned this morning, looking at use of pronouns. Just to show you a couple of personal meaning maps, students were given some instructions and were asked to write down what they thought a science learning environment meant to them. And they could put down anything they thought about. So this is just one example. They were given all the pens and paper and everything else. And yeah, interesting. Yeah, I always like to include that one. Good perspective from a girl in Year 9. Don't know what she thought about science, really. But then we got to the collection of photographs. And after the personal meaning maps, I should say, I interviewed the students, and then we collected the photographs. No, good. And this is a photograph taken by a student, and I've looked at this and gone, wow, must be focusing on that experiment. To me, that was what stood out. But what was more important to her? Was it the experiment, or was it something else? When she spoke, it was, I'm so professional, I'm wearing a lab coat. This is fantastic. And this was the highlight for her. These lab coats were new, and this was a highlight. She wanted that sensation of being a professional in a professional place. This girl took quite a few photos for me, and it's been mentioned before about the arrangement of rooms and access to space. And you can see the tables all set out in rows, again in a science classroom. Trying to see the whiteboard at the front. Yeah. She did actually mention that sometimes you actually have to stand on your chair to see around people, or make sure that you sit on the side so that you've got access to learning in the classroom. Her personal space, that's her desk where she works in the science room. Yeah, they've had to learn to cope with that and be prepared for it. And they actually now come in sharing books so that they've got room to do what they need to do to meet the needs and requirements, expectations of the teacher and for themselves. She also took these photographs just to demonstrate how important the presentation of place is to her. Neither of these are in the science room, but the library on the left, you might tell it's from the older campus with the straw ceilings. I don't know if anyone remembers those, old woven straw ceilings. but we've got all the planets and the stars in there, and she thought that was fantastic. The other picture is celebrating all of the student artwork, which is along the administration entryway, and she thought that was significant as well. She didn't take any photographs of the science classrooms in their presentations, because the presentations in there were old ones. They weren't hers. They didn't belong to the students. They weren't celebrating what was going on in their classroom. These two photos, these were taken by another student, and they were discussed by 3 students as a group. And this is at the newer campus. You'll have to excuse the blurry images, but as they spoke about these photographs, there was a lot of conversation about different things that they could see. Looking at the picture on the left, it's just looking at the size of the prac benches, the space to work. There isn't enough space. They want to be able to work in small groups. They want to be able to do things for themselves. They want to be able to participate actively in what's going on. But they don't think they've got enough space. They've got some space, but not enough. There's also not enough between the chairs and between those benches when they're doing an experiment. In that same classroom, you can see that the tables are arranged on this campus in a horseshoe. They think that's pretty great because they can all sit there and collaborate, they can have discussions, this is great fun. What they don't like are the windows at the back. And the windows at the back of this classroom go into the next classroom. There's windows that go into the corridor. There's windows that go outside on the other side of the classroom. And there's windows that go into the prep room at the other end. There's 4 sides of windows. There's nowhere to put anything up to display. If you want to, you've got to actually climb above windows to do it. And you can see that there's displays up there. They find this irritating, they found it annoying, they found it that it limited their learning because they weren't able to have those displays in place that they needed to enhance their learning experience.
9 minutes.
Okay. All right, so what these students wanted. Overall, and a lot of the conversation was common when I listened to both of these interviews. They were saying similar things. There were differences because of where they were, but they did want that opportunity to be professional. They did want the opportunity to be in professional places. They wanted the space to learn and do things. And that space was the measured space, whether it was their table, where they put their books, whether it was their prac, so that they could all do something, or whether it was time. And I had to mention that one after this morning in some of the comments, because they did want time. They wanted time to be with their teachers and to finish things that needed to be done. They needed places to learn, things like the desks. They needed displays because they considered them places for learning too. And they wanted different resources. They described them as tools, and using activity theory, I'm thinking that was interesting that they actually said, but we need the tools, and the teacher is one of them. Places to learn, they wanted to be clean and well maintained. That was an interesting discussion with one of the other students that I won't talk about now. But clean, well maintained, and having the right colours in there was really important. They wanted to celebrate what they could do and had done. And they also wanted access to innovative experiences. They really wanted that ability to do different things at different times in their classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Now, Darren, how are we looking for the feed online? Okay, so we're now going to hear from Neve Barry, who's joining us from Dublin. I think it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and she has promised to stay up all night and watch the rest of the presentation, so we'll find out if she's done that. Clearly bleary-eyed, or she'll just go to bed, hopefully later. Shall I keep chatting away for a moment? Can we come on? Hello, Neve, can you hear us?
Hi, Anne. Can you hear?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Let me introduce you more formally. Lee Barry is a Master of Education student at University College in Dublin. I believe that you are submitting your master's thesis in 2 weeks' time, having got an extension yesterday. It was due tomorrow. And so no doubt that's been very helpful. We met Neve, Wes and I, and Heather, and with Darren Scott just the other day via Skype. But the beauty of social networking is that she found Learn via LinkedIn. So the world's a small place. Neve, over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's morning here, so I'm kind of confused. I actually went to bed and didn't stay up the whole night. So I saw session 1, session 2, and then I went to bed for the rest, and I'm back up now. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint with you now, so if you just, I just have to share this. Okay, so can you see my PowerPoint now? Is it up on?
Not yet. Ah, yes, here it comes.
Okay, so my name is Neve Barry, as Ben introduced me, and I'm a Master of Education student at University College Dublin. And I'm also a secondary school teacher of PE and Science, so Pamela, I really enjoyed your last talk also. I'm currently completing my thesis, so I have a 2-week extension, and so I was really able to prepare for this presentation as a result. My thesis is on a learning space in the west of Ireland, and Ireland is currently, so here's just a map I'll just show you. This is the west of Ireland, here's Dublin where I'm in college, and then this is where I work in Wexford, so it's actually a geographical challenge as well as everything else. The Irish education system is undergoing reform at the moment of the junior cycle framework. So junior cycle framework is 12 to 15 years, so I think it might be the equivalent of your years 7, 8, 9, your middle years in Australia. So the framework is based around quality, well-being, creativity, innovation, choice, flexibility, engagement, participation, inclusion, continuity, development, and learning to learn. So the learning space in this case study was examined to see how well it facilitated framework for reform. So the aim of the study was to highlight the value and importance that new learning spaces can bring with curriculum reform rather than using the traditional learning spaces, so that the junior cert reform would be successful and meaningful on this occasion, as they had attempted junior cert cycle reform on 2 previous occasions, and it hasn't really been reformed. So Rydeen supports these views when he maintains that spaces need to be responsive to evolving educational programs, philosophies, delivery methodologies, and student and staff needs. So I'm just going to show you the architectural plan of the school. This is a temporary building, and it's built for a capacity of 300 students. So you can see that the learning space is circled here in the centre of the school, and I've just given the case study school a pseudo name of Borough College, in case you just hear me referring to that again. So there are 2 learning zones in the learning space. So there's Learning Zone A and Learning Zone B. So Learning Zone A consists of movable partitions, benches, tables, and you can see the demountable stage. That's 800 millimeters in height. Learning Zone B then has group workstations, an interactive whiteboard, a link to the outdoor natural world through double doors, a few whiteboards, and it also has movable partition. So as you can see, the movable partition divides the 2 learning zones, so it can be opened or closed to facilitate teaching and learning. So the methodology that I used, there are actually only 5 full-time teachers in this school. So all 5 full-time teachers participated, and the principal participated. So they facilitated the teaching and learning across a variety of subjects, so maths, English, Irish, and science in the learning space. And they also facilitated across interdisciplinary modules. So for example, STEM education and computer science and coding. So computer science and coding and STEM, they're called short courses, and they're part of the new curriculum reform. The data on the lessons then was gathered by audio journals and photographs. and semi-structured interviews with the teachers and the principal. And then I coded and analysed the data using the themes of an assessment rubric, which I composed from the principles of teaching and learning. So I'll talk more about that in my findings. So my findings of the research so far are the development of the principles of learning and teaching space assessment rubric. So I've named that tool Pulsar. And I developed this from the Principles of Teaching and Learning document from the NCCA. The NCCA is the National Council of Curriculum and Assessment in Ireland. From an emerging template from the American Architect Institute for Assessing Learning Spaces, and from Fisher 2005, who adopted Scott Webber 2004 also. The learning space had the ability to engage or disengage students and teachers. And this supported recent research from the literature. So when Cleveland reported that students showed greater engagement when they were given opportunities to do project and group-based work across a variety of learning zones. And the findings also suggested that the learning space design in Irish schools has been neglected over the past 50 to 60 years. So the principal highlighted his restrictions from the technical guidance documents of the Department of Education, and he lamented about the lack of flexibility of the current classroom's layout and equipment lists from the department. So the Department of Education, not only do they have an exact school design layout for the whole school design context, but they also have an exact room layout. So for example, the plugs, the overhead projector, they all go in the exact same place in every single school. So he just said if he was to look at implementing any changes in that, it would be funded by the school itself. And just bear in mind that most second level schools in Ireland are 100% state funded. So he did want to have more flexibility, but unfortunately the current classroom layout and equipment list from the department did not lend themselves to that flexibility. Thirdly then, the research findings pointed out that the new learning space did promote active teaching methodologies among the teachers, and it stimulated professional dialogue among the teachers. It's really interesting that there was actually intra-department professional dialogue, so say teachers in the Irish department talking to each other, but there was also interprofessional dialogue across departments. So the maths teacher was talking to the Irish teacher about what he did, and the teachers commented that this was not something that had happened before they'd used the learning space. The research also suggested that students and teachers had higher levels of creativity, energy and motivation in the new learning space when compared with the creativity, energy and motivation in their traditional classrooms. So one teacher commented, for it to change, I think, it would have a lot of investment. I think it's something that happens everywhere in like 20 years' time. So this teacher cannot see schools in Ireland from his experience taking on board new learning spaces for at least another 20 years. The research concluded then that the CPD, or the Continuing Professional Development on Learning Space Design, and the use of new learning spaces in Ireland is rare for qualified teachers and non-existent pre-service teachers. So there's one module on the Master of Education programme at UCD called Learning Spaces in conjunction with the National College of Art and Design, and that's the module which I took. So there was only 8 teachers took that module, and as far as I can find out from all my research, there is no other professional development course for learning spaces in Ireland. So what are the relevance of these findings to Ireland? Well, at the moment, between 2013, 2012 and 2016, and probably up to 2018 if the building projects get delayed, there are going to be 275 new major school buildings beginning over this period in Ireland, over primary and second level. And that's up to a cost of €2 billion. So that's a substantial investment for Ireland to make in school design, school building. And if they do not consider school design, then that is a substantial waste of money and a waste of an investment. A second relevance is that the Teaching Council are currently developing a continuum of professional development. The Teaching Council was actually set up in Ireland in 2005. So they have recently brought in a code of conduct, and now their second project is continuum professional development. So there's an ample opportunity to include learning spaces on that continuum. Thirdly, the curriculum reform is at pilot stage. So what is going to make this curriculum reform different from other curriculum reforms? The assessment is different, but I believe that also the learning spaces need to change to have effective curriculum reform on this occasion. So there are no funded large-scale studies that have been conducted to assess learning spaces across Ireland. So huge investment has been made, and beyond the scope of traditional post-occupancy evaluation, which has only recently taken place and only at primary level, no studies have been carried out to see the effectiveness of any learning space. These studies could then be used by baseline data needed to advance the learning spaces during this time of curriculum reform. Researchers need to realise that there are connections, or need to bring to the forefront the connections between teaching practice, student experience and learning spaces, so that the architects and policymakers, so that they realise how valuable these insights can be to school design. So what are the implications for this research? So I've just discussed the relevance, and now here's what the actions that need to be taken. So school leaders and teachers also need to take responsibility for the resources and classrooms at their disposal at the moment. So perhaps they could use the Pulsar tool to assess the spaces that they have and to improve them and to reconfigure them in traditional spaces to create or suit the needs of the new curriculum in the best way that they can with the resources they already have. The Department of Education and Skills, the DES, should evaluate its school design process, its room layout and its technical guidance documents to bring them up to date. The addition of teachers and principals to these design teams would be beneficial to the new learning spaces in schools. So at the moment they have structural engineers, quantity surveyors, architects, building engineers, building services, management teams, but they have no educationists and have any input to school design. So I was talking to one principal recently, and his school opens in September. He was appointed in February, and he had no input into the design of his school whatsoever. And he was told the design process was over when he inquired. So the Department of Education needs to provide flexibility and autonomy to schools in relation to the furniture requirements on the technical guidance documents. And a furniture budget allocated to the school will be beneficial. So the principal in my case study school suggested this, that he would rather, if he was given a budget for furniture, rather than a technical guidance document telling him exactly which furniture he has to get and what number of that furniture. So 30 chairs of this exact type, 30 benches of this exact type, exactly prescribed and exactly what he has to get. He has no flexibility or autonomy around that. The Department of Education should also create and implement CPD for teachers and principals in relation to learning space design, and these in-services and professional development courses could be run by a professional development service for teachers, which is already up and running, and it offers quite a comprehensive service for professional development for teachers. So in conclusion, I just think that the Irish education system needs to push the boundaries in relation to the involvement of schools, of stakeholders, of teachers and principals and teachers and students in the design of their learning spaces, especially with the substantial investment that's going to take place over the next 5 to 6 years. And I also think then that the learning spaces could be changed and used as a symbol of overall change during this time of curriculum reform.
Thank you, Dave. Now, what we'll do now is you'll hear Dr. Ken Fisher, who's going to act as the discussant or interactive. Is that right, Luke?
Yes.
Very good. And hopefully you can hear him. And I'll hand it to you, Ken.
Thank you. Oh, we're getting a bit of an echo, I thought. We are. I can hear myself. Look, thanks very much to both of you who spoke. I just wanted to ask the audience here, in the context of both presentations, do you like sitting in this arrangement, or would you rather be in a cabaret-style round table, sitting in groups with space to put your papers on your laptop? Which would you prefer? Who prefers this method? Who would prefer to have round tables with?
With a PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you.
Get the other things to go as well.
Well, indeed. Yeah, that's what it's about, active learning. So, you know, cabaret, absolutely. Sorry, I get dismayed when I see straight rows of seats. So, I should have said something earlier, but I was late. So, and there's not enough tables anyway. However, I just wanted to pick a couple of points out of Pamela's. I think it's incredibly timely. There you are. Incredibly timely study. There are a couple of gurus here, almost, if you like, in science education. And I'm sure they'll be, like, they've been in the game for a while, and they teach professional developments around science education and space for it. And I'm sure they're going to be very interested in your findings. One thing I did find, though, I could phrase it as a question, I suppose, but it's just an observation, because I'm big on glass walls, like community learners, everybody can see everybody. Australian Science and Maths School, you can see from one side of the school right through to the other. I think in this day and age of multimedia, we should be using a lot of digital projection. And one day glass, you'll be able to have projection on glass. You know, you can have it on, what's it called, CSI. You know, CSI don't move all these images around. So why can't we do it in classrooms? I shouldn't use the word classroom, I hope that will. So that's just an observation. I think I hear these complaints all the time about glass being a problem, but I think there's ways around it. I'm not being, I mean, you can actually just drop screens down and so on. So maybe that is a question, if you could respond to that, and then I'll come to Niam in a sec.
I think for a lot of these students that I was talking to, they're used to a very typical classroom environment. They get taught by a teacher, and the teacher's sitting at the front of the room. There's focus on the whiteboard, and they're not used to, or they object to people looking at
I can't, there's the sound, I can't hear the question.
Oh, which microphone is working? The one up there. It's the one up there, I think. Up where the camera is. Sorry, I asked this question earlier. It's up back near the technicians.
I think.
Is that okay? Carry on.
Okay. For these students, they found that they wanted their teacher in their classroom, and they gave an example. Somehow we got to a discussion of Chris Pringle giving at the end of last year, and they wanted to be in their own private space, and they didn't need anybody else looking in, and there were glass walls, and it was an invasion of their privacy, and the glass was just too much, having 4 walls of glass. When this campus was built, there was the whole idea that you could see from one end of the building to the other through glass. And that was the design of it. I personally don't have a problem with it, but the students did prefer that discrete classroom for them to work in. Maybe it was something that came with them from primary school. Maybe it was the way that they'd been taught in other classes, and people, I know people did move whiteboards in different classrooms and put posters on walls in some of them and things like that, and make it discreet.
No, it's a fair comment actually. I mean, in hindsight, I suppose you do need private spaces for private conversations. I suppose there's the duty of care and the casual observation of teachers wondering what students are doing. But having said that, we do need a range of spaces with certain characteristics. So it's how you get over that duty of care thing, I suppose.
Do you think it's a neither nor situation where you're neither in a new collaborative open plan space, nor are you in a cellular space? You're in no man's land, it's neither nor, so the kids aren't quite sure so where they're at. So if they're still experiencing a lot of didactic teaching styles because of the space, and they're used to sitting in the back row, Skype, like texting or whatever, and they're conscious of the window behind them. But if they were not in that situation, in a different situation with more independence and more trust over time, because it's a different learning situation, do you think, I've heard student voice before say it's a neither nor situation, we're not trusted, so therefore we end up sitting in back rows and wanting to block windows, but if it was a different culture, it might be different?
It could be. I did ask a couple of groups of students if they would, how they would like it if we had no walls into the corridors and we could use corridor spaces and blend classes. And they've sort of gone, oh, that would be distracting. And it was something totally new, and they really had to think about that. And some of them thought it could be a useful idea, especially if the walls could be put back in place or the dividers. But it would depend on the subject, the class, the time, what they were doing. But being just with glass as a divider, they aren't in a particular space or place. And Sorry, just adding on to that, we do have in these new team buildings at one campus, we do have open classrooms, double classrooms, and last year the principal put walls down the middle of them so that we don't have collaborative teaching space.
I'm just going to ask, I guess, small comment. I think something we sometimes forget about school students is that they've had a history of being taught in traditional classrooms. And in fact, we always talk about the teachers and how they're going to change with these new spaces, but we sometimes don't consider the fact that the kids themselves feel uncomfortable about a change in their circumstance. I did some surveying of some school students before we started a project in Albury, and I was amazed at the year 9 and 10 kids. They were kind of, I don't want any of that stuff. I like being in a row, you know. So I think we forget about that. There's a cultural hangover for kids as well as for students as we talk about these changes in places.
I think there's an aging stage thing to that actually, because in primary school they like cubby holes, and they also like to be in the big group as well. And then you get into the middle years, and I think there is a bit more about privacy and their mates and, you know, identity building. And then you get into senior school, but I was going to ask Jamie actually, in year 10, 11, 12, and the Australian Science and Maths, you still right through the whole lot. But I think that is years 10, 11, 12, and so maybe when you're sort of an emerging adult, it's not such a big deal. Can you comment briefly?
I think the significance of that open space in terms of students mentoring, students in year 12 mentoring year 10, 11 is really important. And that sometimes students do feel uncomfortable about working in their open space. However, that is the future. That is where they're going to need to be working. So we have a role to help them operate, if you like, in that kind of space as much as we have a role to supporting their learning in other aspects.
And there is, I'm just going to sit here. If you actually have a piece of furniture that's this high, and I've seen it at a primary school that I was involved with in Bangkok, I go into this library, and sometimes it's just, you know, a library, other times it's a classroom sitting in the middle of the library with the bookcases wheeled up to form a classroom. But you can, you know, if you walk around, you can see in there. But when you're sitting in there, you feel like you're in a nice private space. So there's other ways of creating that screening, and I've seen high back chairs as well that you can move around. They might be double chairs. You can move around and create spaces. So I think there's all sorts of ways that are not to do with walls or glass. They're to do with artefacts, I suppose. Yeah.
I think there's another way of looking at it, both Pam and Megan could look at. Teachers view the totality of the space, students don't. Students view the space as it pertains to them. So even though the space is open, students aren't necessarily seeing it that way. And I don't think we know and understand that well enough. That's certainly something that's emerged from the Australian Science and Maths School experience, how students adapt to working within their world, within an open space.
You do see it. I want to come back to Neve. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Do you know a guy called Tony Shepherd?
No.
Oh, you'll have to meet him. He was the head. He was the recent head of the Centre for Effective Learning Environments in Paris at the OECD.
Oh, the OECD, yeah.
And he headed up this innovative learning environments program, which was a hybrid between the Centre for Effective Learning Environments and the Centre for Education, Research and Innovation, CERI. So there were a whole bunch of case studies, of which the ASMS was one, and there's a few others. I know Tony quite well. I'd really love you to meet him and tell him exactly what you just told me, because he is in a position, he's head of facilities for your part of the island. I don't understand how Ireland works, but for your part of Ireland. And he needs to know exactly what you've just told us. And I'll arrange it.
That's brilliant. I've actually read that report from the OECD. I just didn't link it up with Tony Shepherd. But
no, well, I don't
think his name is on it, but yeah, I've read that there's a book published on the evaluation of the learning spaces in the...
Yeah, absolutely. Now he's just had a design competition where he had I can't remember, it might have been 3 schools that were designed, and they asked architects to design. Now I don't know if you know it, do you? Yeah. Do you know the study?
There was a competition in Ireland. The Minister for Education put a competition for primary school design and for secondary school design. So I don't know if that's the same competition or a
It
different one.
is, I'm
But
sure it
there
is.
was one
Yeah.
administered from Ireland.
Yeah, and I don't know whether he had principals or teachers involved in it, so that would be an interesting question to ask him. I shall ask him.
Yeah, I don't think so, because they had a conference at Dublin Castle, but it was architects and the minister and his policymakers, but nobody else knew about it.
This is just fantastic. This is a fantastic story. I'm going to give him a really hard time. He's no longer the president of the CLE, because CLE has the Centre for Effective Learning Environments, partly because they didn't have any evidence or data to put into the OECD machine. The head of the education division was going to get rid of it, and they said, no, hang on, we're going to jump into PISA, and we're going to do a study through PISA, which I can't remember the acronym. But yeah, I'm rambling on.
No, it's, I'd just like to ask Lee a question, if I may. When Ben and Heather and I and Darren did a test run on the Skype with me earlier in the week, she mentioned that I understand all schools in Ireland are built to the single template, or virtually the same template. In your address, you used a lovely little phrase, and I'm just wondering whether you could explain a little bit more. And you said that one of the reasons why you need to be able to bring in more innovative learning space in Ireland is to act as a symbol of change. Do you want to just speak a little bit more about that notion of what you're talking about there? So, in relation to this, just simple change, is that what you said? Sorry, I didn't... Symbol. You said would act as a symbol of change.
Symbol, sorry. Yeah, so that was my concluding point, that I just think that a lot more needs to change, not just the learning spaces. So the teaching methodologies are also very didactic, and everything is teacher-led because of the focus on terminal exams. So he's trying to bring a focus on assessment and continuous assessment and student-led activities with curriculum reform, but I don't think he'll get that unless he changes the learning spaces as well. So if he changed the learning spaces even slightly, it would be a symbol of overall change.
They're interrelated.
That explains it.
Yeah, good.
Oh, this is terrific news. Now, any questions, comments?
Can I make it, I don't know if this is tenuous or not, but Steve, I don't know if it's sort of your presentation about architecture leading innovation in terms of societal innovation and the type of education. So I think there's a sort of a theme running through the day.
The gentleman behind it, about architecture's change.
Yeah, the cultural change, organisational change. So I think that's one of the themes that's run through today, is that architecture is, like this symbol that you've raised the question.
Oh, yes.
So it sort of keeps popping up across the presentation through today. I sort of point that out.
Well interlocuted.
I need to sit over there.
That's right.
That's good. Can you tell us about that?
You've just done it. Yeah, look, I'm just really interested in following this up, because I think your findings in Ireland are just really, well, almost damning. But are your masters is about to go in next week or the week after, because you've got an extension because of this gig?
20th. Yeah, 20th of June is my deadline now.
Has Wes got you writing an article on it, or?
I'm sure we will.
Because I really think what would be good is to send Tony Shepherd, Tony Shepherd, an article on your findings.
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
I mean, he could read the whole thesis, I suppose, but if he's too busy, like most bureaucrats are, a 10 or 12 page article would be brilliant. So we'll be in touch.
Okay, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great news. Good. Really nice study. So, nothing else? No?
I think people. Thanks, Steve. It's really good you could join us. I think we'll wrap up. People are pretty well, not brain dead at all, but I could understand if you did feel a bit cocky because you had information thrown at you. I said a while ago, these are some of the topics that have been covered across the day, and we just added a few more. And it's a lot of information to get, etc. So I'd just like to finish off just by making some thank yous. My first thank you is to you for coming, turning up, supporting the event. I imagine that we will run it again. The notion of having a place that is dedicated to the new thinking that's coming through young researchers, and I talk about everyone here as being a young researcher, It's extraordinarily valuable. This is adding to Learn's already comprehensive repertoire of knowledge and skills that sort of helps bring together this network. And bringing the RHD students in this way through an event like this, I think is extraordinarily valuable and useful. You are actually giving the old staid researchers in this field a whole bunch of invigorating ideas and notions of where else to go, etc. I'm walking away with a bunch of things that I didn't think about before. So my thank you to you for turning up to support, and thank you to the presenters today who did such a sterling job. The 10-minute things are hard to do, and all of you did it beautifully. It really worked well, so thank you very much for that. Yes, the two thank you. I would like to thank the IT team that Darren and Celia have spent the whole day with us, as well as time before. Darren's been running test runs with Skype over a few days, as well as laying out cables. He'll be here later on pulling up cables, etc. We're streaming live, we're Twittering, we are doing Skypes across different parts of the world, etc. We are videotaping and putting that. Celia's going to take away and put it into captures and going to put it up onto the website. So a lot of work behind the scenes. Education IT, thank you so much for your help and support. I'd like to thank our interlocutors. I think that actually they did a brilliant job today. Having experienced researchers with the knowledge that that Peter Jamison and that Claire Newton and that Ken Fisher brought to the event really helped. It helps to have a person that sort of background knowledge come in and pick out things, etc., and start putting ideas out there. So a great big thank you to you guys for your time. And I'd like to thank the management team for running this, and in particular Heather, who probably hasn't had a lot of sleep in the last few days, the last few weeks, and to Ben as well, and to Ken. Intellectual input into this has been phenomenal, so thank you so much to the people who organised it in making it all happen. And finally, a big thank you to NGSE for hosting it in their building, and when we run it next year, maybe we'll run it in the architecture space to be democratic. I
just want, while we're thanking everybody, I want to thank Wes, because Wes has done this with his team, essentially, together with Ben, almost single-handedly. And there's 4 chief investigators, but really there's only one. We're going to have to deliver somewhere at some point along the line, but Wes done a terrific job pulling this together. So thank you, Wes.
I realise he is about to pay for it, because once we start getting these papers rolling in, editing these papers back to a book and getting it published out there as quickly as we can do it, it's going to be a big task. And Ken brings so much expertise that he's going to be able to just virtually all the editing himself. Thank you in advance.
Thank you very much.
Ben, was there anyone else I had to thank? Have I thought thank everybody? It's always dangerous to start thanking people by name. It's a big trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Phoebe? Oh yeah, Phoebe, good on you.
They're related.
Phoebe Zarella, she's also actually showing us around after capital. We are going from here. People would like to, we're going just up the road to the Cornish Arms, is that right? Cornish? Is that where we said we'd go? And just to have a drink or two, if you want to join us. It's a nice little corner pub. So bottom of Leicester Street, up towards the main campus, and it's just on that very first corner.
Is that on Grattan?
No, it's not that far. It's the very next corner. It's only about 2 minutes walk from here. Just opposite the law buildings. In that
okay.
Thank you so much for coming, etc. Please don't forget to take your stuff. Please remember to look out for the book. We'll send an ad, and we'll sell it at the cost price that it will contain the information received today. Look at the videos, look at the website, and hopefully we'll see you all next year. Thank you.